Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this breakout session. I am Ana Cabral Bonham, a faculty research fellow at BYU Law School. Here at BYU, my researchers involve international tax law and human rights. I am a Brazilian lawyer and a professor of law. When I think about tax, inequality, and human rights in Latin America, I ponder, what are we as Latin Americans? As scholars, as politicians, or just as Latin American citizens, how can we contribute to the real development that guarantees dignity and living for all of us? What challenges to cooperation do we face in an international perspective? Cooperation among us, cooperation for the world. This afternoon, I have the unusual opportunity to present two Brazilians and a citizen from Mexico. The two Brazilians we have in here, who are also a married couple, Rosângela Moro, a Congresswoman, and her husband, Sergio Moro, a senator. They will be speaking to us today about Latin America's challenges and potential, and about how it can grow and improve in the fields of human rights and liberties. Also, Jorge Silva from Mexico, he will speak about human rights and how we can improve human rights and liberties in Latin America. Rosângela Moro has been a lawyer since 1997 and has experience in public law and third sector. She is the author of the books Rare Diseases and Public Policies, Understanding, Receiving, and Attending, and Legal Regime of Partnerships and Civil Society Organizations and Public Administration. Sergio Moro is a federal senator of Brazil. His experience includes serving as the Minister of Justice and Public Security of Brazil from 2019 to 2020, when Jair Bolsonaro was in the presidency of Brazil. He was a Brazilian federal judge for more than 20 years. Moro earned a bachelor's degree in law from Paraná State University and both a master's degree and a doctorate in law from Federal University of Paraná School of Law. Jorge Silva, the citizen from Mexico, he is the General Director of Religious Affairs in la Secretaría de Gobernación de Mexico. This symposium is an amazing chance to dialogue and learn from one another, including from those with varied religious or other views from our own. Now Brazil, like almost any democratic country, for example, has diverse political parties and movements. And I myself happen to be from a different affiliation and a viewpoint from the Moros. So in the spirit of this symposium, it will be very interesting to hear what they have to say today as Brazilians with the position in the Congress of Brazil. At the end of those speakers, we will have our speaker, Jorge Silva from Mexico. And at the end of their speeches, each one has 13 minutes. I will open the remaining time for questions. With that, I would like to turn the time over first to Congresswoman Rosângela Moro. and then to Senator Moro.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank your invitation to participate in this symposium and say that I'm very happy to be here. And I kindly request permission to speak in Portuguese. I'll do slow to allow the interpreters assist us. Okay. Liberdade religiosa. Desde a Constituição da República,
religious freedom. From the Republic, Brazil separated state from religion. And as a laic state must assume a neutral position, seeking impartiality and not support or discriminate any religion or as an official religion. The federal constitution is our main document that protects religious freedom in Brazil, and it considered religious freedom as a fundamental right. No one will be deprived of their rights because of their religious belief of philosophical condition or politics. This is a broad thing. It consists in freedom to choose your religion or to adhere to any religions and change their religion, and the freedom to not adhere to any religion, and the freedom to not believe in anything or to be an atheist or express agnosticism. Brazilian state has to provide their citizens a climate of perfect religious understanding and protect them from intolerance and fanatism and ensure the free exercise of all religions. Although this is a very delimited division between state and the churches and religions in general, without any official religion, we see that still in Brazil we have religious holidays as an inheritance from the time the Catholic religion was official in our country. It is common to see in public buildings and courts in our country symbols of religious expression. It has been argued in court, and some appeal courts say that it is a reaffirmation of the religious reality of the Brazilian society, and therefore it is permissive. The National Council of Justice, which is administrative for the entire justice branch, it also coordinates with this position, and it will be faced by our Supreme Court. Religion and politics. The status of lay situation does not allow this interdependence between the religious entity to which the person is bound. In the Congress, among the 513 members, some of those, and among 80 members of the Senate, about 14 senators are part of a parliamentary front that is evangelical. In this legislature that started in 2027 and ends in 2027, they defend conservative agendas. Brazil is a country of religious tolerance. There are episodes, but they are isolated episodes. Recently, we had an episode of intolerance. A representative invaded a church and caused some turmoil, and the mass was locked in that temple with people locked in there. People were able to enter through the sides, and there was damage. His mandate was confiscated because he broke the quorum after the due legal process, but he is discussing an error in the process. He obtained a decision, and while the judicial process is going, he still has his mandate. Our Constitution does not allow the free exercise of any religion or belief, but our Constitution also ensures the legal process, the due legal process, and in that case, for now, they have chosen the second. As I said, this is an isolated episode. Other could be mentioned, but in an isolated way. We have great national diversity in religion. We have religions that are African, Brazilian, Islamism, Judaism, and Catholicism, and all those religions can coexist pacifically. In numbers, 50% of the Brazilian population is Catholic, 31% of the Brazilian population is evangelical, 10% has no religion, 3% are spiritualists, 2% are in an African matrix religion, 0.3% are Jews. This is from a 2020 research. The Brazilian Constitution established that the state is lay. It is not associated with any religion. This ensures that the government does not favor any religion, and they must be neutral. We have laws that ensure the religious practice and locals of worship, and they can be taught to the children. Discriminating is a crime. The government and the civil societies have fought to ensure those rights and exercise their faith freely. Many belief, protection to cults, and protection of liturgies, and assistance in other institutions, and nobody is going to be deprived of their rights because of their beliefs or political convictions. Prohibition of states and municipalities to be in the way of their relations of dependence reserved in the form of the law as public interest, as we saw in relation to COVID, the pandemic, and states and municipalities interfered with the program of cults and religions. That religious teaching is facultative, which is optional, but this is optional. The public resources can be destined to public schools that are administered by philanthropic or religious, without the end of having profit. Education and religion. Our Constitution establishes that public schools of elementary level should have forcefully a curriculum with optional, but within their regular school time, because we don't have an official religion. And therefore, we cannot choose to teach only one religion, because if that occurred, it would be promoting proselytism sponsored by the public power. And our Constitution was to give opportunity to students in the age where they're learning to be able to choose freely, to choose a religion. And in religious teaching, we should talk about the various religions that are present in Brazil, practicing good deeds and the good welfare of all, And how do you teach and transmit concepts about all religions without forcing prevalence of their own ideas or ideas of that religion that are represented? There is it's impossible to recruit teachers by religion. The application should be a public contest, and then the teachers should be able to transmit their ideas with a relative degree of exemptness. It is, when you register for school, it is facultative. It means you can choose to enroll in religious teaching, and that choice, those teachings can choose to attend that class or not. Where are the students going to be if they choose not to enroll in that class, if they are not doing anything during those classes, or if they are having another class? That option of choice is threatened. Another problem is peer pressure. If most of the group says that they want to have classes about a given religion, how do you not impose that to the minorities? Or how will they feel if they do not belong to the majoritary religion? Those arguments, there are people that defend that teaching that during the regular school time is against the Constitution in relation to the obligatory separation between religion and states. Religion and justice. Religious freedom has become a subject that is more and more discussed in our country. Decisions such as permission for confessional teaching in religion classes, and the right of Adventists to to apply for contests outside the Sabbath, their Sabbath. In Amazon, there was a law that a Bible would be present, an action proposed by the leftist, the main leftist party. They said that Indian peoples would be threatened by that, and the permanence of missionaries with health evaluation are allowed, but the leftists do not want to allow that, and they mention that the state should be lay. And the following conflict: how do you decide when it's necessary to have blood transfusions like the Jehovah's Witnesses? The ministers will decide if there is a conflict between the obligations of the health system in Brazil and the religion of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And those procedures without transfusion, that is not allowed by those that identify themselves as Jehovah's Witnesses. Two aspects are considered here: respect to those that freely decide to exercise their religions and refuse to receive a transfusion in a medical procedure, and the responsibility of the public power to adopt an alternative treatment. And this issue is being debated in the Supreme Court, not only for the religious freedom, but also the consideration that those religious groups that want procedures that are not incorporated into the health system. And I'm getting to the end. Our federal constitution guarantees that temples are immune, and they are immune to taxes, and they have the intention to ensure religious freedom so that temples can exercise their activities without interference from the states, because that could compromise their immunity. That's conditional, and the entity must prove their requirements. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. Has been a wonderful symposium, very interesting. I'm learning a lot. I was a judge in Brazil, now I'm a senator. There is a problem here when you invite someone and you say you can speak in English or you can speak in your native language, and then we need to choose Portuguese to speak in Portuguese. I'm sorry for that. Mas muito obrigado, então, e vou continuar o resto da minha apresentação.
I'm going to make my presentation
Em português.
in Portuguese.
Minha esposa, a deputada
My wife
Moro, falou muito bem
spoke very well
do cenário geral
about the general situation of freedom religion in Brazil.
e o fato
And the fact
nós
is,
temos uma ampla liberdade
we have
religiosa,
total
uma tradição
freedom. It's a tradition
construída
that has been in place since the first constitution in Brazil,
muito baseada
based
na Constituição norte-americana
in the North American Constitution,
de 1891.
which is
E ela
1891.
no que o Brasil era um império
Came after the Brazilian Empire ceased to exist.
e Estado,
And the church and the state was having a conflict at the time,
levando a
reason why
surgimento da República.
the republic became a reality for Brazil.
Questão de fazer uma separação
And
estrita
they found
entre o Estado
then the
e a
importance
Igreja.
to separate the state from the church. As has been said before, we do not have an official religion in Brazil. And the state
Em princípio, ele é proibido
is
de promover
prohibited to promote any type of
como
religion,
existe, assim como é a situação.
as it is the case in the United
A
States.
compreensão brasileira, porém, sobre essa separação, ela difere
But
em vários aspectos.
in our case, we have a different aspect about the separation.
Nos Estados Unidos,
In the United States, of course, we have a huge religious diversity in Brazil. The majority of our population,
colocados dados específicos
as
católica,
previously mentioned,
temos visto
is
crescimento
Catholics.
muito significativo
But there is a huge growth
ah,
from
da religião
the
protestante nos últimos anos.
Protestants in Brazil,
Com que, pela primeira vez,
making for the first time
discussões nas últimas
there is
nomeações
being a dialogue
no Tribunal Federal Brasileiro,
to the Supreme Court in Brazil about religion.
tivemos
Religions of those candidates for the Supreme. We just had a minister of the Supreme Court that was indicated by the last government,
questão política em
and his religion became a political issue because he was Protestant in a Catholic
apenas coloco esse fato
in a Catholic country. I present this fact because it was an uncommon discussion in Brazil, but not only shows the growth of the diversity, but the fact that the religious diversity became a political issue. The debate political now is considering religions as a factor of decision factor.
pontos que aparentemente
Apparently,
levam a alguma contradição, alguns pontos
they
de
believe
tensão.
that religiosity creates certain contradictions. We have holidays in Brazil, and these holidays in Brazil are religions, holidays that are associated with the Catholic Church. October 12, for example, is the date of the saint in Brazil, Aparecida, the Mother of Christ.
Dr. Jorge da Nossa Senhora de
I
Guadalupe.
don't know if it is the equivalent of Guadalupe in Mexico, but it's a Catholic holiday in Brazil. This is not reason for conflict in Brazil, even though the holidays in Brazil are religious or Catholic-based.
Temos esse caso
But
que
we have, for example, cases such as that was mentioned by the Congresswoman in Brazil. It's very common in public buildings in Brazil, in our courts, or even in the Supreme Court in Brazil, the presence of images, religious images,
também relacionadas
which is related to the Catholic Church still.
Salão Pleno do Supremo Tribunal Federal Brasileiro.
In the Supreme Court in Brazil and the House in Brazil, we have the cross hanging on the walls. In the past, they questioned the meaning of this symbol in all public buildings. But until now, the office responsible for this National Council of Justice have voted to keep these symbols, but there is a case in the Supreme Court right now in which they are arguing the viability of keeping the cross. So in the future, like here in the United States, we like prayers in public buildings, prayers in public schools. We do not know how our Supreme Court will vote.
Vai resolver essa questão.
But it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Mais discussões relacionadas
Other arguments being raised is the discrimination,
principalmente envolvendo
especially involving
homoafetivos, homossexuais,
homosexuality,
julgamento do Supremo Tribunal Federal relevante.
with the Supreme Court.
O Supremo
They are
homofobia ou discriminação
defining
de homossexuais ao crime de racismo
homophobia the same as racism,
na nossa legislação.
which is forbidden in our legislation. And they are equivalently creating a duality between homophobia and racism.
Religiosa,
And they hope that this dialogue will be able to bring light to the understanding as a crime. And this question is yet to be resolved as homophobia as a crime. And so the answer from the Supreme Court wasn't clear. It is
permitia que houvesse,
therefore,
poderia restringir o discurso
they are yet to
mas que o discurso
clarify
religioso é um discurso
the
de ódio,
final decision, but they are
que a Suprema
worried
Corte
about the hatred
brasileira quis dizer.
in the dialogue taking place. But the fact is, in general terms, the situation of religious liberty in Brazil is very easy. We are a very tolerant people. We are a people that respect the diversity of all religions,
Seculares,
not only secular religions and traditional religions such the Catholics and Protestants and Islams. We have a small Jewish but very ever-present group in Brazil as the African groups, religious groups, and the Indians in Brazil that was presented this morning by Judge Eric from Rondônia. We have one problem in Brazil of violence, but our violence is related to crime. But we do not have an association between criminality and religions. What we have seen that is giving some type of worry is that since Brazil became a democrat a country fully engaged in democracy in 1980s when the military government was thrown out, and with the Constitution of 1988, we noticed that the censorship was banned. Censorship was part of the military government. And since the Constitution of 88, any type of censorship was forbidden. So freedom of press became complete and very well protected under the Constitution. But as a side effect, we can see not only in Brazil and also in the whole world, we have seen the return of the censorship in Brazil through
decisões judiciais,
judicial decisions from the Supreme Court,
delas unicamente.
and
Censura
also
não relacionada
censorship
propriamente
that is not directly related
à questão da
to the
profissão
question
ou
of
manifestações
profession or
religiosas,
religious manifestations,
relacionada a
but
questões
directly
de
related to
manifestações políticas,
political
eventualmente
reasons,
relacionadas
eventually associated with
ofensas ou
offensive
muitas vezes
and many times
isso não
inappropriate,
tão singelo para ser caracterizado, como também
or
ofensas
also
a minorias, sob o pretexto muitas
offense
vezes
to
de combater
minority,
fake news,
like
notícias falsas ou
fake
hate
news,
speech,
hate speech,
ou eventualmente
and eventually
ataques às instituições
attack
democráticas.
to
Tem havido
the
uma volta
democracy.
da censura. O governo
And this is becoming more
quis
prevalent.
estabeleceu
The government tried to establish
Procuradoria Federal
an office to fight the
as fake
disinformation or fake news. But evidently, all of us, we are against disinformation and fake news.
discurso de ódio.
Hatred speeches.
Somos contra também
We are
ataques
against
às instituições democráticas.
any
O grande
attack to
problema é que
democracy, but
caracterizá-las
the
como
problem,
como tal,
as you
provavelmente
characterize them,
envolve, controvérsias
this
e-
creates
e debate
controversy
público.
and public
Então, um grande
debate.
receio que nós
And one of the
temos hoje
concerns
no
we
Brasil
have in Brazil
é
today,
que, nós talvez
we
estejamos assistindo
maybe
uma volta à
watching
restrição
the return
da
of
liberdade de
restriction
expressão, da
of the
liberdade de
freedom of
pensamento,
speech, freedom of
dentro,
thought
das instituições brasileiras. O que nós
inside
não
of the
vimos
Brazilian institutions,
desde
what we have not seen
o fim
since
do
the end
governo militar.
of the military
Embora
regimes.
essas práticas muitas
Although
vezes
this practice may
possam ser apontadas, não, mas a finalidade aqui é boa, é para
may be under the smokescreen of goodness. Directly with the freedom of religion, but I privately, personally believe all of this is correlated to religious freedom. Once you take a step to the wrong direction against freedom of speech, the next step will be to limitate the limitation of religious freedom.
fundo, isso também foi colocado dentro do painel,
After everything has been said and done,
seja no central ou seja
be
existe uma
be where it
correlação
will be. There is a
muito
correlation
entre as liberdades
very important between
fundamentais
fundamental
e, igualmente,
freedoms
o rule of law,
as,
né, o império do
and the
direito.
rule of law
E nós
or
temos
the
visto,
empire of the
infelizmente,
right.
nos últimos
And we
tempos na
have
América
seen
Latina,
this in Latin
e aqui eu
America
falo geral,
lately.
porque não apontar
And here I'm
país,
speaking
nós temos
generally,
visto
not
um
one,
enfraquecimento
no
do
country
rule of law,
specific, but we
muito
have
por
seen
conta do
that
crescimento
as
do
leis,
populismo, seja do
the rule of law
populismo
is
de
being
direita, ou seja, do
weakened
populismo,
because
de
of
esquerda.
the
uma das primeiras vítimas desse
actions of the
populismo
left wings in all countries in Latin America. And one victim is the freedom of speech and freedom of religion is being directly affected. So I bring this discussion to an end,
relacionado especialmente a essa
but establishing the relationship that in my
discurso
message today
sobre os atuais riscos às
about
liberdades fundamentais na
the
América Latina,
risks that the fundamental freedoms are suffering today. I learned recently a citation that was made
o país no qual nós estamos, que é país
this country that has very strong traditions of protection of liberty, which is the United States. So I bring my conversation what Judge Robert Jackson,
na primeira metade do século passado,
this,
e para mim ele tem
who
uma
practiced the second half of
que orienta
of the
a necessidade de nós
past century,
protegermos
he said the need to protect freedom of speech.
those who begin coercive elimination of dissent soon find themselves exterminating dissenters. Compulsory unification of opinion achieves only the unanimity of the graveyard. que nós carreguemos essa lição na América Latina, para que nós
This
não
lesson
deixemos crescer
in Latin America
as limitações às nossas liberdades.
to all of us that we never give up the protection of our religions of freedom, religion of expression, and religion of thought. It is a step that must be taken as we protect our freedom. Thank you.
Vamos a ver. Bueno, creo que bien. Bueno, siguiendo el ejemplo de Brasil, mi exposición
Following the example from our Brazilian friends, now in representing the Mexican government, the Secretary of Government, I will speak in Spanish.
antes que nada quiero agradecer
Before I even start, I would like to thank for the invitation that I received to participate of this very important symposium, 75 years, 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights.
a lo largo de la historia de la
Throughout history, humanity has traveled the path of civilization, leaving behind a route marked by invasions, conquests, and wars.
no ha sido fácil
It has not been easy to reach agreements that allow us to devise other ways for human development,
ya sea porque somos
because we are very different from each other, or simply
porque no hay interés.
because there's no interest in doing so.
Hace 75 años,
75 years ago,
después de haber vivido
after having lived through one of the most devastating armed conflicts in history,
las y los líderes de
the leaders of many nations signed a document so that as humanity,
seamos
we are
capaces de
able to
vivir
live
de una
in a
manera
different way,
diferente, poniendo
putting
en
at the
el centro
center
la
the
dignidad
dignity
y los
and
derechos
rights
de cada
of
persona.
each person.
La Declaración
The Universal
Universal de los
Declaration
Derechos
of
Humanos
Human Rights
se constituyó
was a landmark
documento que marcó
document
un hito
in
la
history.
Fue elaborada
It
por
was drafted
representantes
by
de distintas
representatives of
regiones
different
del mundo,
regions of the world
diferentes
with different legal
jurídicos
and
culturales,
cultural backgrounds.
y proclamada por
And
la
it was
Asamblea
proclaimed by the
General
United Nations General Assembly in Paris, on December 10th, 1948.
La declaración
The declaration sets out the fundamental rights that must be protected throughout the world
y es
and is
ampliamente
widely
reconocida
recognized for inspiring and paving the way for the adoption of many human rights treaties that are now applied at the global and regional levels.
sin la intención
Without intending to quote here the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
me interesa
I am interested in referring to what is established in some of them.
en principio
In principle,
que todos
that
los
all human beings
nacen
we are born free and equal in dignity and rights,
y debemos
and that we should behave fraternally towards one another,
independientemente
irrespective
de
of
raza,
race, color, sex, language, religion,
opinión
political, or other opinion,
origen nacional,
national or social origin,
posición económica,
property,
nacimiento,
birth or other status.
todo individuo
Everyone has the right to life,
a la
liberty,
y a la
and
seguridad.
security of his own person.
Me detengo en particular
I dwell in particular on Article 18,
en el que puede leerse que
which
toda
states that
persona tiene
everyone
derecho a la
has the right to freedom of thought,
de conciencia
conscience,
y de religión.
and religion.
Este derecho
This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, as well as freedom to manifest his religion or belief individually and in community with others, in public and in private.
esta declaración
This Universal Declaration, as we have commented,
nace
was born of a historical necessity
y se proclama
and is
como una
proclaimed as an
aspiración de la
aspiration
humanidad
of humanity to achieve the advent of a world in which human beings, freed from fear and misery, enjoy freedom, love, and fraternity. A high desire that commits us all to make it a reality, both at the level of the law of each national state and in that of every human being who inhabits this wonderful planet. Given this desire, the question arises, what are we doing to achieve it? As a representative of the government of Mexico, and also as an individual, I would like to share some ideas, focusing my attention on the right to religious freedom. Mexico, as a secular republic, establishes in its constitution in Article 24 freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. In order to implement these guarantees and regulate the legal life of religious associations vis-à-vis the state, it has the law on religious associations and public worship and its regulations. In general terms, in matters of religious freedom, the Mexican state guarantees in favor of the individual, one, have or adopt the religious belief that most pleases him and practice individually or collectively the acts of worship or rites of his preference. Two, not profess religious beliefs, abstaining from practicing religious acts or rites, and not belong to a religious association. Three, not to be subject to discrimination, coercion, or hostility because of their religious beliefs, nor to be forced to testify about them. To frame the right to religious freedom in Mexico, I will briefly refer to some ideas about secularism and, obviously, democracy. In the first place, we must make it clear that secularism does not mean the abolition of religion, but the freedom to decide on matters of religion, therefore, in doctrinal beliefs. For this same reason, it is necessary to be careful so that secularism does not take aspects of civil religion or is sacralized in some way. This demands that it not be conceived as an anti-clerical ideology. Secularism is a key element of democratic life, as it recognizes the fundamental rights of individuals and the social and political acceptance of pluralism. In a context marked by the growing interaction between countries and people on a global scale, carriers of customs, religions, diverse cultures, it is essential to favor the coexistence between the plurality that we are and allow respectful dialogue of different positions in a framework of and the free choice in matters of religion and belief is a fundamental right. However, we must take care that the exercise of this freedom does not violate the freedoms of others. The interdependence of rights must be respected. In order to realize this right, the state must be able to ensure equal treatment of all persons. It must be free to elaborate collective norms without any particular religion or conviction dominating public power and institutions. This equality is not only formal, but must be translated into a political practice that ensures that no discrimination is exercised against human beings in the exercise of their rights, particularly their citizenship rights. In this sense, we believe that secularism is fulfilled when these three principles are harmonized. Now I quote, respect for freedom of conscience and its individual and collective practice, autonomy of politics and civil society in front of particular religious and philosophical norms, no direct or indirect discrimination against any human beings. Once these conditions are established, religious freedom can be exercised, understood as the right that people have to profess and practice any faith and educate their children in those religious principles that they consider the most appropriate. Throughout the history of Mexico, the Catholic Church has had a majority, almost unique presence, so society as a whole learned to live according to the moral principles that emanated from that religion. Thus, for many years, the need to recognize those who had another religion was ignored, or they were simply ignored completely. However, this is excellent. In recent years, the country has experienced a significant change in the percentage composition of the population according to the creed it professes. The 2020 census yielded interesting figures in this regard. Compared to the 2010 census, the most significant data are Catholics went from being 82.7% of the population to 77.7%. Protestants and evangelicals from 7.5 to 11.2%. Non-believers from 4.7 to 8.1%, with an additional 2.5% without religious affiliation. Mexico, without a doubt, is in a clear process of religious diversity, which has been generating profound cultural and social transformations whose demands must be met. As a state and society, it is not only important to recognize diversity, but also to establish conditions for it to move towards a true plurality that respects and values the different ways of believing and practicing a religion. The changes that these transformations entail are not limited to confessional adherence or the passage from one to another, but to the way in which the population experiences their religious or the spiritual. It is necessary, therefore, to understand that religious diversity is not a threat, but a richness capable of broadening the horizons of our perception, an opportunity for different religions to know each other and recognize that being different, they are part of the same society, and it is possible to coexist in harmony. It is desirable that by assuming a position of respect for what is different from us, we are able to promote dialogues and increasingly significant meetings that will build peaceful, just, and solidary societies. Let us work together so that the principles established 75 years ago, and whose desired horizon was and still is respect for human rights, for a peaceful human coexistence, is a true experience in each of our communities and our countries. May religions become fundamental social actors to carry out this task, and states may be guarantors of the freedoms that all human beings have the right to live. Thank you very much.
I appreciate your talks. Eu agradeço os seus discursos e agora nós temos tempo.
And now we have some brief time for questions and comments. You, please, your name and your country and your question or comment. And it was growing. The democracy in Brazil is younger than the Portuguese. The democracy in Portugal is 50 years old. In 1974, when we stopped being a fascist state, the most basic indicator of human development is children mortality rate, and it was 40, and now it's 2. It's lower than the mortality in the United States, and it's very concerning when we have threats to democracy. And I see, and I apologize for the controversy, and I see fake news, but the movements that are formed in the social media as a great concern and a great threat to democracy. We are all, and I think everyone here in this room, they defend democracy. We have to put aside our differences, and we have to find our way for dialogue and presume that growth and democracy cannot be threatened at any time. And this also happens in Portugal when you post on social media hate speech. The hate speech is criminalized in Portugal. Whatever it is a crime. But when they are disseminated in the social media, false news, we are running a risk. And it is done here with the manipulation that you see there. And my question is how we that defend democracy can achieve an understanding to defend social development, but we want to protect democracy from groups, and they talk about financing groups that are on the social media to undermine democracy, and putting aside our differences and being united to compete with and fight all those threats to democracy. And about religious freedom, outside of this, there are no human rights, no freedom of religion. Thank you very much, Susana. About democracy, and you reminded me about Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, a certain time, he said that what divides us is not our ethnicity, is not our religion, it's not our differences and our diversity. What splits us is those are two groups, those that conspirate against democracy and those that defend it. Nelson Mandela spoke very well about that, and thank you for your question and comment. Would you like to comment on anything? Professor Doxy. Professor Doxy.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And those comments were very important.
Al doctor Basaldúa, que hablaba sobre la laicidad, un concepto muy importante.
A very important concept taught in the Western Hemisphere, a way for preserving democracy.
La laicidad.
Secularity Sometimes secularity is misunderstood. Sometimes it's understood as a secularism so extreme that it eliminates religion from the public space, and they and the church. What would you suggest as a guideline, as a limit to protect that secularity so it does not become an extremism? Thank you very much.
The fake news and the hate speech are a contemporary challenge. Yeah, I think I'd better have the microphone, the other microphone. The subject of fake news and hate speech is a subject that is very relevant, and of course it could be a threat to democracy. However, the great question related to that, and this has been discussed in Brazil, who decides what's fake news or hate speech? And we have to differentiate two specific situations: the consequences that come from a speech. If someone preaches or uses social media or the press or personally threatens someone, that's a crime. And in most legislation, that's the way it is. If you say a lie, you can be brought to court. What has happened in Brazil is a suppression of postings and elimination of people from social media. It's a situation that is a little different. I frankly, on this subject, even though this is a very sensitive subject, I consider with very much appreciation what happens here. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, he defended the liberty of expression in situations where they had to judge on the first half of last century, because the word expression always presented risks to democracy. When the Communist Manifest, they preached the Communist Manifest, and the United States did not suppress books by Marx or the Communist Manifest. The test was clear and present danger. If the word at that moment would generate a risk, that would be a possibility that it would be censored or suppressed. So we have a tie with democracy, and the Brazilian democracy must be protected, but I don't see how to defend democracy if we start to admit censorship of the government on the word and the speech. Those who control are the controllers, and what we have seen is the creation. They created an institution. I am opposition to that, but we say that they seek truth, but they are used to suppress speech with the pretext that they are combating fake news. But those are bad news to the government, but there is a fine line here that is complicated, that makes the question, are we against, we are against fake news or hate speech or attacks to democratic institutions, but we have to see that censorship in itself is anti-democratic, and there is a institutional risk in give this power to a government institution. But I've been following your position, because these are threats to democracy, but not as different from what we've seen in the past. We think it's a new thing, but the lessons from the past also serve to the present. Maybe the healthiest way to resolve this issue is to admit a broad public debate on that and expect that truth will prevail in a discussion between people at different levels. Rosângela or Jorge Silva, do you have any other comments before we finish?
Regarding this idea of secularity, I would like to say two things about that. First, to understand that secularity, more than a concept, is a process. It's a process which is fundamental that we must understand in a historical context. For example, I think about Mexico. The build-up of secularity has been a long process. Sometimes we consider that as different than the one that Latin America is going through now. And also, I believe that how can we guarantee, how can we build this secularity process in such a way that it does not become on an idea that separates, that annuls, the religious thought. And I'm going to give an example. Us, for example, those who are trying to put in practice as federal government and as committee of religious organizations, we're working on a national strategy at the national level to consider religious diversity. And we are doing that from three axles. One of them, which is fundamental, is dialogue. Dialogue implies respect to diversity, be able to... One of those axles is that respect, that dialogue, building processes to meet. And being here in this symposium, this is wonderful. This type of meetings that allow us to pay attention and to listen to other people's opinions, to widen our understanding of diversity, to make it more plural regarding having understanding. Also, as a government, we have to form, we have to teach. In Mexico, specifically, we have a history of that secularity, being enemies to anything related to religion. That started back in the 19th century. We understand that we must change that, and that had to start from the government level. We have to form, we have to give the people elements so they will have more resources to understand that secularism is not separation. It has its own boundaries. Also, we have to inform. Those are the three axles of our strategy: dialogue, form, and share. Sharing this idea of religious diversity so people will understand that we are forming a new group, a new society, very heterogeneous. And that makes it necessary for us to work, to think, to be open-minded. So the same way I shared in my speech a few minutes ago, so we could have access to a plural society, a respectful society, a democratic society.
Muito obrigada a todos e dou por encerrada esta sessão.
That's it. Thank you. And I declare this session closed.